Hello, and thank you for listening to Texas History for Kids. I'm your host, Michelle Gallegos, an educator, writer, history nerd, and novice investigator. Each week on the show, we will learn about interesting parts of Texas history, from battles and historical figures to the odd and enchanted. Welcome back to episode 2. Are you an educator looking for a way to engage your students in more listening or comprehension skills? Did you know that most of my podcasts have a link to free resources for listeners? Since my podcast only lasts about 15 minutes or less, students can listen during waiting periods, and they're great activities for those fast finishers that we all have. Head on over to my website for the free goodies at michelleauthor@gmail.com. Today's episode will take you through a journey of unexpected finds along the Brazos River. Have you ever dug a hole and found something that you didn't expect to find? Whether it be a penny, a nail, an old bone, or even a cool rock? Well, there are people whose job is to do exactly that. An archaeologist is a person who studies artifacts, things that were made by people long ago that have been thrown away or just weren't useful anymore, and they've long been buried and forgotten over time. Archaeologists save and study these artifacts to help them discover what humans did in early years and learn much more about their cultures and way of life. One such archaeologist is Albert Redder, who moved to Waco, Texas after serving in the Army in World War II. He had been interested in learning about ancient tools since he was a young boy. Well, on July 4th, 1954, while everyone else was celebrating our nation's Independence Day popping fireworks, Albert Redder decided to take a swim in the Brazos River in Bosque County, Texas. While swimming, he noticed a rock shelter shaped like a dome on one side, across from the river. Of course, Al had to investigate this odd formation in the rock because exploring was his jam. According to him, it was about 150 feet wide and 22 feet deep. He figured someone had dug this hole while looking for artifacts. But as he continued searching, Al noticed yet another peculiar shelter that seemed to be smaller than the first one. He crawled through a small space and saw a dirt floor. On the floor, he found an ancient stone scraper and bones. He knew right away these tools must have belonged to ancient people. But he had no clue what else he was about to uncover. In 1960, Al decided to excavate the smaller shelter. He got permission from the owners of the property where the shelter lies to dig in its area, but he was very careful not to tell others, for fear they would loot or destroy any evidence. The larger shelter became known as the Horn Shelter, after the last name of the family that owned the property. In 1966, he finally asked for help from fellow archaeologist Frank Watts, Tom Francis, and Bob Forrester. Each man took a location to excavate. The word excavate means to dig carefully. On August 15, 1970, Al found something that would change his life and the history of Texas forever. He dug 15 feet into the floor of the cave. Think about how deep that is. An Olympic-sized pool is 12 feet deep. This was 15 feet down. So if you've ever swam at the bottom of a pool, you know that's pretty deep. Well, 15 feet below the surface of the earth, Al found a full skeleton of a girl. After research, Albert Redder and his team believed that she might have been about 9 or 10 years old. She was well preserved. The news of their finds was spreading quickly, so Al and his team knew they had to work quickly. On October 30th, 1970, they began excavating the area around the skeleton. Since it was buried under heavy limestone, which is a type of rock, they had to be very careful not to damage the skeleton. While digging, they found yet another skeleton. This time, it was of a man. It took the team 3 days to excavate both skeletons. Researchers believe the man was about 40 years old. And oddly, they found some artifacts with him that they couldn't really pinpoint what they were for. Under his head, there were 3 turtle shells. Under his pelvis, another turtle shell, and there was also one covering his face. It is unknown exactly what these items symbolized, but it is no doubt a ritual from many years ago. Scientists are unsure if the man and the girl were related, but they say it is the oldest burial found in North America. And here we have it in Texas. Isn't that cool? The oldest burial found in the entire country is in Texas. Now we're going to go ahead and move on to the end of the excavation. Al and his team found the site where the man and the girl had been buried was almost 11,200 years old. Scientists believe they didn't die there, but were buried there later on after they died. Archaeologists do not know how they died at this time. Al continued to excavate for many years after that and actually found other items like a badger's bones, coyote's teeth, shell beads, and 19 slabs of limestone rock. All of these items, it was presumed, were used as tools in Texas during the last ice age. The archaeologists also found charcoal that was 12,000 years old. So this area is no doubt ancient. They also uncovered artifacts that proved the people who lived on the land more than 11,000 years ago also hunted bison and deer. But they believe that the people of this area mostly ate smaller animals like rabbits and rats because they built very small fire pits to heat and cook their food. Since the fire pits were so small, it would have been hard for them to cook a huge bison on a small fire pit. And that is the reason why they feel that bison and deer were probably not animals they hunted often. Since these people were very close to the water, it is also believed that they ate things like fish, turtles, and water plants. It took the team 26 years to fully excavate the horn shelter, and they were able to take out 60 boxes of artifacts throughout this time. I would like to give a shout out to TexasBeyondHistory.net for this episode. This is where I obtain most of the information for this podcast. You can visit the Bosque Museum in Clifton, Texas to see an exhibit of artifacts found at the Horn Shelter. Today you learned what an archaeologist is and studied a Texas archaeologist and his findings along the Brazos River. I really hope you enjoyed today's episode. Did you know that you can be an archaeologist too? Well, guess what? They actually want your help finding artifacts. Every year, the Texas Archaeological Society hosts a field school in June. Students are able to work with real archaeologists on a real archaeological site to dig up and find artifacts from long ago. They'll teach you things like the proper way to dig, because when you're digging up the past, you have to be careful. Otherwise, you might damage or destroy what you find. Students are able to dig for 4 hours and then take the real artifacts to a lab where you can examine them closely. Archaeologists will help you understand what you found. When you're a part of this program, you will learn about how people of that region lived and the things that they did, such as building fires, the weapons they made, and even about how they cooked their food. Wouldn't that be an extraordinary experience? Learn more by contacting the Texas Archaeological Society at www.txarch.org or txarch.org. I'll add it in my show notes for reference. Well, I hope you enjoyed today's episode, and perhaps you might discover something new and dig up the past. This week's question is, how can archaeologists help us understand the way of life for early Texans? Send me an email at michellegallegos.author@gmail.com and I just might feature your answer in an upcoming show. If you or your child has received valuable information, please share the show with friends who might find it interesting. You can also visit my website at www.michellegauthor.com for those free resources for today's episode. Remember, yesterday is today's history.